Phillipson who's gone as he's trying to make it 3 wins in a row now. And what a shame, but Moore's been passed. Cavendish has gone. The last man to win here has just won it again. Mark Cavendish, 2015. Welcome to 2021. That was unbelievable.
Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. As you can see, I'm wearing this ridiculous, somewhat embarrassing, doesn't quite fit hat in honor of Mark Cavendish. It's a green hat, Skoda, that I got from the tour. Again, I'm wearing that in honor of Mark Cavendish, our subject for today's podcast. Of course, we all know what Mark Cavendish has done in the tour. It's unbelievable, amazing. He's come from 4 years of really kind of not being around to being completely around, 2 stage wins, and in the green jersey, hence the green hat. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, and that's why we're talking about this here today, is his contract. Now, everyone knows that he's on sort of a UCI minimum, and of course that's going to change, and you know, it's a story that's been touched on throughout the coverage. It's been touched on Lance Armstrong's Move podcast, and Johan Brunel's touched on it, but in this episode, we're going to go into the full detail. So now I don't have any inside information, but everything that's available, we've combed through, and this is going to be the kind of definitive look at his contract situation, starting in kind of that November, December 2020 and going on to, you know, where we currently are, which is 2 stage wins, the green jersey, obviously won a green, obviously won an intermediate sprint today, looking very good. Okay, so Mark Cavendish. All right, obviously everyone knows he's kind of arguably the greatest sprinter of all time. Him, Cipollini, it's close. I sort of now put Cavendish above, but nobody cares what I think. But again, it's debatable, right? He's either the top sprinter or he's the second, third, that kind of thing. He's unarguably top 5. Unbelievable career. 30 stage wins in the tour. Well, now 32 stage wins in the tour. 50 stage wins overall in Grand Tours. He's won Milan-San Remo. He's a world champion, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, he's 4 years removed from really winning at that level. He one of the great quotes that I love that stuck with me, I think it was from like 08, 09 when he was on HTC High Road, was somebody made some comment about him pushing or shoving, you know, kind of in the early part of a sprint. And he said, quote, "You race like juniors, you get results like juniors." Very Cavendish, okay? And then, you know, you read about his time at HTC and some of his memoirs and books, and he talks about being in the final sprints and following the varicose veins of George Hincapie in the lead out in his HTC days. And then, of course, it kind of, in some ways, the last real sign that we saw of Cavendish in the tour was not a fantastic situation. It was a situation where the tour opened in England, I believe, and Peter Sagan kind of put him into the wall to some degree, although anyone who's well-versed in cycling will know it's kind of debatable, but Sagan's elbow went out, and he was relegated for that stage, and you know, Cavendish's quote was something to the effect of, "I love Pete, but..." And that's kind of the last we saw of him at the high level in the tour. So our story kind of starts here at the end of last year, at the end of 2020, at the end of the COVID year, where he was on Bahrain Meridia, of course, which we talked about. That's a Team Bahrain. The bikes are made in Taiwan, and that's kind of where this story begins. So let me take you back to Ghent Wevelgem, where after the race, Cavendish is crying, saying, "This is most likely my last cycling race." About an hour after that, many teams started calling, thinking, okay, he's not renewing at Bahrain. He thinks he might retire. He's probably the greatest ever. Maybe there's a little something in the tank. At the very least, there's notoriety, something that we can sell and market. So they start calling. But according to Mark Cavendish, and I think this was quoted in a Cycling Weekly article, Cavendish basically said there's sort of one team that I wanted to go to. There were many teams calling. There was really only one that I wanted to go to, And of course, we all know that's back to Quick Step, which is run by Patrick Lefevre. It was Edix Quick Step at the time that he was there in 2013 to 2015. And it's run by Patrick Lefevre. And it's a team that's been around. I mean, we've done, obviously on this podcast, we've talked about how much the sponsors change. Quick Step is one sponsor that's remained, I think, since prior to the year 2000. And Patrick Lefevre's remained in charge, a brilliant strategist, and they're an extremely winning team, usually the most winning team. They win a lot in the classics. They win stages in the tour. And, Ineos is, former Team Sky. They're kind of the recent dominant team in Grand Tours, obviously, but Quick Step is big in the classics and all of that kind of stuff. So Quick Step, and Mark Cavendish was very successful at Quick Step. Quick Step is also a specialized team, i.e. they ride specialized bikes, which Cavendish won a lot on during his time at Quick Step. So after this Bahrain interview and after all these teams started calling and after Cav kind of viewed that his career potentially was over, he met with Patrick Lefevre. They had dinner, and basically, according to Lefevre, according to Cav, and many news articles, Velo News, Cycling Weekly, various news publications, Lefevre said, "Look, I'd love to have you." I think his direct quote was, my heart says yes and my brain says no. He says, "I'd love to have you, but I'm basically out of euros. Can't have you come on the team. I can't pay you, basically. I'd love to have you. You've done well in the past. I'd love to see you succeed and kind of have this resurgence. Obviously, he's very well known, et cetera, but I can't pay you. I don't have any money." And of course, the UCI is a league minimum. So at the World Tour level, you have to pay your riders a certain amount of money. That's a little over 40,000 euros. And so Lefevre would have to pay Cavendish the minimum, and he wasn't even able to do that. So he said, "Look, I'd love to have you on, but I can't pay you basically anything." And Cav kind of knew at that time, as he said in many interviews, that really the only place he wanted to go back to was Quick Step, was back to the Wolfpack, was back to Lefevre. And so he went out, and of course, Cavendish has made a lot of money in his time. He has a lot of sponsors throughout his career. But he went out and he got a personal sponsor to actually pay that league minimum. So not only was Cav on a league minimum contract when he signed with Quick Step, we'll kind of get to the history of how that contract progresses, entering the tour and, what it's going to be now. But even at the time when he was on this league minimum, Quick Step wasn't even paying him the league minimum. So he had a personal sponsor come in. That sponsor, and this is according to an interview that he did, and I really wish I didn't even have to try to pronounce this. I probably should just put a link of it in the description below, because this is going to be really horrible for everybody involved and everybody listening. But I'm going to say it's Het Nieuwsblad. And according to an interview that he gave there, he said that, I wanted to help Mark, but I ran out of budget. Quote, he suddenly offered to pay for himself. I couldn't say no to that, of course. So Mark reached, and this is according to Lefevre in this Het Nieuwsblad article. He says, again, he suddenly offered to pay for himself. I couldn't say no, and he thought it wouldn't happen. He said, personal sponsor, I don't think this will happen. Give it a few weeks, whatever. Well, he said, not only it wasn't even a week later. A sponsor called, and he says that it was the Canadian company, Lovingly Made Ingredients Food Company, which apparently is a vegan kind of meatless food company, and they offered to cover Mark's costs. So according to Lefevre, quote, "They pay us, then we pay Mark." And then this is another key. So there's that component. So again, Mark's making the league minimum. Lovely Made Ingredients Food Company pays for his league minimum payment. This is when he came on. Another key component, and this was reported by Velo News, but also quoted here by Lefevre, was the specialized component. So, of course, Mark rode specialized when he was on Quick Step. So Mark was on specialized bikes. He helped actually design the specialized Venge. So Mark Cavendish, even after he left Quick Step, still maintained a good relationship with Lefevre, still maintained a good relationship with the representatives at Specialized. There's a whole other can of worms, but in some ways it's akin to Lance at Trek. When Lance was at Trek, he had $7 to $8 million worth of stock. The value, $7 to $8 million was given to him. He worked with Trek on designing a lot of these bikes. Again, in 1999, Trek didn't even have a time trial bike. They rode on a light speed frame that they painted with Trek colors. So Lance was instrumental in Trek, getting to the point where they've got this Trek Madone now. And it was the same to some degree with Mark Cavendish's Specialized. So when Mark Cavendish was at Quick Step, riding a Specialized, winning at this extremely high level, they brought him in and said, hey, what can we do to improve? What can we do to make this bike better? And of course, Cavendish helped design the Venge. So again, when Mark Cavendish left in 2016 to go to Dimension Data, he maintained close relationships with Lefevre and with Specialized. So again, circling back, when Lefevre lets him on the team, even though he doesn't have the results, pays him the league minimum, this lovely made ingredients food company pays his minimum wage salary, and then the bonuses that are negotiated in the contract, Specialized agreed to pay. So Mark Cavendish, the greatest sprinter of all time, arguably, goes on to Quick Step at the league minimum with Quick Step on the hook for effectively nothing. Lefevre on the hook for effectively nothing. Lovely made ingredients food pays his base. Specialized Bikes pays his bonuses. And he gets to work. And again, even at this time, so he didn't want to go out like this. He didn't want to retire like this. He told Lefevre he didn't want to retire like this. Lefevre said, I understand. Patrick Lefevre knew that, look, this guy's a popular rider. Twitter has reacted positively to us bringing him back, regardless of his results and his current abilities. He's a very popular rider. People definitely want to see him on Quick Step. And he can be a mentor for the young guys. He can be a mentor for Sam Bennett. He can be a mentor for these other individuals on Quick Step. And that's what he was brought in to do. Now, of course, we know Mark was really motivated. He really loved being back in the Wolf Pack, as they call themselves at Quick Step. He really loved being there. His training was going extremely good, even from the beginning when he first arrived. There's many reports on that. And then, of course, as the season went on, a weird thing happened. Cav started winning. He started winning. He hadn't won in several years, and he won in the Tour of Turkey, and then he won again, and again, and again. He won 4 stages in the Tour of Turkey, so he was winning. And everyone says, well, it's the Tour of Turkey. But, of course, he beats Markov. He beats really good sprinters. But, again, it's the Tour of Turkey. Sam Bennett's the defending green jersey champion. Even though Sagan is maybe not the same Sagan that he was before, still Sam Bennett beat Sagan. He won a couple stages. He was the green jersey. He was a very good sprinter, and he was meant to lead the team. Well, then, after the Tour of Turkey, Cavendish goes to the Tour of Belgium and wins a stage there against some really good competition. As that happens, Sam Bennett gets injured, decides he can't really make the tour trip, and apparently there was some, discussion between him and Lefevre. We don't know exactly what was involved there, but they're not on the best terms. But again, Sam Bennett was injured, couldn't go. And so now here Patrick Lefevre is. He's got Mark Cavendish on this minimum contract. He's got Mark Cavendish, who's got 5 wins this year. We now see several against top sprinters, but at the time it was sort of viewed that really only one of the victories was a high level victory. Sam Bennett's out. So now Lefevre says, well, I got to go to Mark Cavendish and see if he wants to be the lead sprinter. We've got Julian Alaphilippe. We've got some other people on the team that can win here and there. But as far as a sprinter, we've got a great lead out train. As far as a sprinter, Mark Cavendish might have to be our guy. So they have a second dinner. So there's the first one after the Bahrain race, the tearful interview. Then they go to dinner. How can I be on the team, etc. Mark Cavendish is having that conversation. Now Lefevre kind of has to go back to Mark Cavendish, have this dinner prior to the tour, only a week or so, 10 days before the tour starts, and say, would you mind being the sprinter for the tour? Would you want to do a grand tour? And Cav's response, not at this salary. So Cav says, not at this salary. Again, Patrick Lefevre in many articles says, look, I understood. There's every time, if Mark Cav, the Tour de France is the fishbowl. It's where all the pressure is. And if Mark Cavendish goes out and he gets close to a victory, then all of a sudden the Merckx talking starts. All of a sudden the 34 stage wins talks. Can he get the 34 stage wins, et cetera, et cetera. There's a huge amount of pressure that comes from that. So Mark said, look, I don't want to do this at paying my own way at $40,000. Patrick Lefevre agreed. They reworked some of the contract with some even increased bonuses where Quick Step would pay some if there was some success in the stages. We don't know the total details of it, but the gist of this is that prior to the tour and prior to Mark signing on to go to the tour, that minimum base being paid by a partner was actually increased. So Quick Step came to the table with some money, at least in terms of bonuses. Specialized come to the table with some money, at least in terms of bonuses. And that's how he entered the tour. So again, to kind of put this in perspective, 40,000 euros a year. I mean, Mark Cavendish is wearing a $400,000 RM watch. So that's, 10 years of riding to get that watch. Now, again, that's some kind of partnership, I'm sure. But just to kind of put that in perspective, that's what Cavendish is coming from. Hey, you've got this RM deal. You've got Specialized paying your way. You've got these other companies paying your way. You got Specialized paying your bonuses. You got other companies paying your way. And you're making $40,000. Anyway, so entering the tour, he had a slightly improved deal. And then, of course, we all know how it went. Played some audio here before. Unbelievable. I've been watching cycling for a long time. You don't see this happen. You don't see it happen in sprints at the highest level. You don't see it happen in the GC at the highest level, time trials at the highest level. So for Cavendish to come back and to still at this age, he won his first stage in 2008, I believe. So we're 13 years after that, and he's still at this level. Again, Caleb Ewing went out. Maybe Caleb Ewing would make things a little more complex, a little more complicated, I'm sure. But, for Cav to come out and win 2 stages already, be in the green jersey, and, Johan Brunel mentioned this on the move, but you can see from listening to the post-race, the first post-race was tears. It was the family. It was coming back to the Wolf Pack. It was the great long return back to the top. And it was unbelievable. But after the second victory, it was a bit like old Cavendish. It was a bit like Lance coming back. It was a bit like, now I'm here to win. Now I'm here to win the green jersey. Now I'm here to win more stages. And of course, the question is, can he get over the mountains? He didn't train for the mountains per se. He didn't really know he was even coming into the tour till about 10 days beforehand. So we'll see. Now, Mark Cavendish has already announced and basically expressed that he would like to come back next year. Of course, Sam Bennett and Lefevre have their issues. Most likely, I would assume, and we'll see what happens, but I would assume Sam Bennett will be on a different team potentially, and Mark Cavendish will be back. But again, after two stage wins thus far, it may be more by the end. He may be a green jersey winner by the end.